In the age of outrage, there's been a lot of shit, a slush pile of cases of people being terrible to one another, and just doing stupid things in general. But the one thing that makes it worse are when people make up shit because they want more fame and nothing more. Jussie Smollett earned around $1 million a year for his show, Empire, and yet he decided it wasn't enough money despite the fact that it would be more than any of us would dream. So he did something immoral. The best way to gain immediate results is victim narrative these days. But what happens if you're so privileged that you don't have any? Well, you do have money, which means you can buy it. Welcome back to Wish for Death Island, and apparently we're analyzing fake hate crimes today. It's just a mood, okay? It's a mood. When I originally started this video, I was about to say Jussie is best known for his role on Empire like everyone else says when they do videos like these, but I'm gonna be honest with you. He is best known for the stupid hate crime stunt. He is best known for using the concept of lynching with all of its terrible connections to slavery and everything else for his own clout gain, and some people are still okay with it because it starts a conversation.
To go through, but I know so many accounts of like white people in history that have faked something that a black person has done to them, and it was never this like serious to people. I just have a question as to why this is like such a big deal.
Well, we're pretty divided right now as a country politically. We're very polarized, and it seems like he did this fake hate crime in order to promote his own career and kind of become like the ultimate victim. Like he's a gay black man, and for those two reasons he was attacked. That was kind of the narrative he was pushing. So I think he should be held accountable. I agree that there are times in the past where maybe historically bad things have happened to people that didn't deserve it, and I think this actually marginalizes those kind of stories, and this actually kind of waters those down and makes them less in the spotlight and less, you know, important in a way. I think this is actually really bad.
Putting a black person on a flyer and saying faker, I get what he did was wrong, but I feel like black people are always the ones to be put on the forefront for doing bad actions. Not saying this was right at all, because I get what the message was. So that was so, the message behind it was positive, the execution wasn't. But I just feel like so many white people do bad things and they don't get put on the forefront.
Which message was positive and execution was bad?
Well, the message that gay people are being attacked in the anti-Trump, I'm so for anti-Trump rallies. I'm so for that. The way it was executed though, staging this.
But really, I for one have never heard of this show. Maybe it's just something that's popular in the US, but every American that I've heard talking about it hasn't heard of it either. I don't think that the vast majority of people outside of the US or in the US knew about this show beforehand, and he seems very aware of this too. Perhaps that was one of the reasons for the crime in the first place. Everything in the story was fabricated. Even his fucking name sounds like a bootleg of a real name. What the fuck is Jussie? Jussie was walking down the street after a case of the munchies that only Subway from Walgreens could satisfy, and he was jumped by two guys who screamed at him before beginning to assault him.
I heard, as I was crossing the intersection, I heard Empire. Empire. So I turned around and I said,
"Hey, my name is Empire, who said that?" They assaulted him while screaming slurs, making it clear that they disliked him because he was a black gay man. A pretty cut and dry thing for a hate crime.
I heard, as I was crossing the intersection, I heard, "What's been drawing dick?" And I don't answer to it.
They yelled, "This is MAGA country," and had two red hats, but they weren't specifically MAGA hats, even though the media, despite Jussie saying that he didn't know if they were MAGA hats specifically or not, the media ran with it and claimed that they were. He fought them off and they just randomly left, but they also poured bleach on him and put a noose around his neck beforehand. He then went home and the police were called. When they got there, however, some immediately suspicious things were pointed out. Let's just take a minute to talk about the concept of a hate crime. Now, you might think that a hate crime is something that is pretty cut and dry when you look at it at face value. It's someone attacking you somehow, be it physically or through blackmail or something else. They're specifically doing it because your sexuality, your race, your gender, whatever else is bothering them. However, you know how the government gets with vagaries around what words you can use. Something that happens when you look at a lot of these fake things is you start thinking about whether or not hate crime is even a thing. Now, don't get me wrong, of course people hate on other people violently as well for things that they can't control, things that they were born with, we know this. But what I mean is, why is it something that has to change the way that you get sentenced when you've done something like this. Somebody who beats you up and pours bleach on you, no matter who you are, that's still a terrible thing to do. Why should they get more or less time or pay a bigger fine or whatever it is just because they happen to hate on you for a specific thing, racism or whatnot? I still think that it should very much be discussed in the same way that a serial killer or school shooter's manifesto is discussed. You need to look at these things to understand why someone did this. Motive is a very serious thing. On paper, sure, it might look like this is the same thing. If you look at the way that it's applied in the real world, why is it that misandry and anything about men is not that big a deal, but as soon as it's disagreeing with a woman, you get all these misogyny laws? It's just never applied equally. So when it comes to something like a hate crime, why is it specifically like this? Why can't we just deal with it as a crime and then talk about the reasons why in a way that doesn't allow for people to start showing favor for certain crimes that they like and crimes that they don't in terms of ideology? But that's a whole side thing. I think that an entire video in itself could be done about that kind of thing. Anyway, Jussie Smollett's attack happened on the early hours of January 29th. Jussie had called the police 40 minutes after the event, and it wasn't even him who did the calling. His creative director, Frank Gaston, decided to call the police because he was at the apartment with Jussie at the time, and then saw the state that Jussie was in upon his return from getting food.
It's basically being sensitive, like his pride is in a way, right?
Okay. I gotta let you know you're being audibly and visually recorded right now.
You know, yeah. And I just feel like, you know, if anything like this happened to me, I would want to report it. Well, I guess, you know, he had gone out to go to Subway or something with his eggs or something.
Okay.
I work with him, you know, so he is like a star. He works on the show Empire, so I think he doesn't want that to be a big deal. You understand what I'm saying?
Okay.
Okay, so.
A common theory is that Jussie didn't tell Gaston about any of this and just hoped that the guy's good nature would make the entire thing seem more genuine. This also means that the police possibly weren't supposed to be called in the first place, but with the reaction that Jussie had when they walked in, I'd say his ego was fine with it. They follow Frank up and his voice is shaking. He does really sound like he cares, which makes the situation even worse if he really didn't know. He encouraged Jussie to call the police, and he said that Jussie is a guy that doesn't really want to make a big deal about this, which I found pretty fucking funny in retrospect. He also said that he had Jussie hospitalized, which Jussie also made a big deal about. It turns out it was just like 2 scratches. The light bruises sound like the type of thing that I'd get on my hip if I was walking around in the dark and accidentally bumped into a low bookshelf. Now, at the time, yes, it doesn't rule out the attack happening at all, but it might be embellished. It's just a sketchy thing to hear. He also specifically in the interview mentions walking in and out of the hospital on his own.
You know, my clavicle was messed up, my rib was bruised, but nothing was cracked. Like, I walked into the hospital. I walked out of the hospital.
Yet he also specifically points out that he was being kicked in the back by the second assailant and apparently had not suffered particularly despite the fact that his spine and backbone were being in harm's way. Through the footage, you start to notice the cops getting more and more suspicious about everything. At first, the story itself sounds pretty weird, as what they were basically told sounded like 2 men who already had bleach and a rope on them for some fucking reason, were walking around at 2 AM and happened upon Jussie at the exact moment and decided to beat him up, and also recognized him in the dark when, as he says, people cover themselves up quite a lot in winter. This also happened directly underneath a streetlight camera.
And I walked them through exactly what happened, and I looked up and I saw that there was a camera directly on the light post that is in the intersection. So I'm like, there it is.
A potential break in the case that would eventually fall apart days later.
And then the detective told me that the camera inside of the casing was facing north.
Meeting Gaston and his certain level of genuineness, it must have been a bit of reassurance, like this must have been genuine, it just must have sounded strange. As they went up the floors of the luxury apartment building, things began to get sketchy, much more than before.
How it's going to turn out into hair washing, I guess we're going to find out. Selsun Blue, ladies and gentlemen. Finally, a real promotion for Selsun Blue right here on DSP Tri-Z.
First, in the apartment, Jussie had the rope on him 40 minutes after the attack. He was just holding it and standing there. He was constantly touching it as if adjusting some sort of accessory on his favorite shirt. It didn't look like it bothered him that much. It looked like he was proud of it. Also, CNN is on in the background. Nothing good can come of this. So you're telling me that as soon as he gets home after the attack, he keeps the noose on, despite how it made him scream beforehand, and then decided, yeah, I'm gonna watch the Cuck News Network today. I want to catch up on some news that didn't happen. Fitting, considering the circumstances.
And the reason I'm calling There's a bleach on me. Bleach on me. Okay. You're filming us, right?
Yeah, this is all being. If you want, if it's in his house.
But even then, he doesn't sound very sad or frightened, and I think 40 minutes means that at least the tiniest bit of that sort of numbing shock would have worn off. Why didn't he just take pictures of it or ask Frank to take the pictures instead, if the noose was the symbol of his attack and his trauma? Not to mention the hate crime targeting him for being black and involving lynching, it would make it so much worse. They literally have to fucking ask him to take the noose off, and then he unwinds it as if he knew how it was tied, and he winds it up to neatly place it on the table so he can keep touching it. Then he says that he doesn't want to be filmed, so they put off their body cameras. The entire time, from the minute the story got out, the media decided that he was definitely attacked, 100%, and they virtue signaled to high heaven, as you can imagine.
According to every journalist on Twitter, on January 29th, he was attacked by 2 white men who were wearing Make America Great Again hats, who called him an F word with a hard T, an N word with a hard R, then poured bleach on him, then hit him a few times, then put a noose around his neck and said, "This is MAGA country," before fleeing. By every journalist, I mean writers from the New York Post, Newsweek, The Daily Beast, Philadelphia Magazine, Vibe Magazine, Nightline on ABC News, Forbes, Slate, LA Times, BuzzFeed, Reuters, Teen Vogue, Cosmopolitan/Glamour Magazine, Rolling Stone, AP NBC News writer, The Guardian, HuffPo, Washington Post, Vanity Fair, Fox 32, not to mention a lot of A-list celebrities and quite a few politicians. There were no allegedlys in any of those tweets either. It was all, "This is what happened."
What do you expect from the media? Actual reporting? DSP would do a better job reporting on the Selsun Blue from his shower. The police from the very start said that it was a heavy claim that required heavy evidence. But the media didn't want to hear that. So the next day, around January 30th, the police started combing through the footage and resources that they could find about this. They found nothing. And this is when the camera is brought up. It happened right underneath the camera, and initially Jussie mentioned it to the police, but then he found out it was facing the wrong way and none of the attack was caught, so he looked disappointed. He also didn't want to help, though, despite him being the victim, because he refused to give his phone up to the police for evidence like a teen girl with her diary because of private things. He only handed them an incredibly censored and unhelpful version of the phone records, so it didn't help at all. Things were just getting more suspicious as time went on. The search continued all the way to February 13th, where they found 2 men who were highly suspected to be the white supremacists that attacked him. Something looks weird about these white supremacists. I don't think I've ever seen a white supremacist wear a grey shirt before. These are the Osundero brothers, who are from Nigeria. They have been caught at the airport because that night they were apparently flying over to Nigeria to lay low. Why were they laying low? Well, they were bodybuilders who were a friend of Jussie, one of whom was an extra on the show, and a search of their apartment made everything more suspicious in terms of their connection to him on that night. On the 16th, the police released a statement saying that they flipped the scope of the search to focus on Jussie instead. They smelled something fishy, and no, it wasn't Clementine Ford. The brothers said that Jussie paid them $4,000 to do the attack, rehearse the attack, and even buy the hats from a fashion shop down the road and the rope from a hardware store. The warrant also revealed bleach and some other things. These guys cooperated, so they were let go, but the other things on the report were a pairing of stamps and magazine. This actually related to an attack a few days prior, where everyone had to be evacuated from the set of the show because someone with an arts and crafts hobby decided to put down the macaroni and glue to mail in a letter saying that Jussie was a black fag, had a drawing of a noose that looked like Joe Biden did it. This wasn't causing a big enough stir, I guess, so he had to up the ante. The letter also came with a substance, and a hazmat crew determined it was Tylenol. Reminder, the hazmat crew resources were wasted, the police time was wasted, and all of this was for some attention. It was very clear that his ego was being stroked. In this instance, he made such a big deal about performing, even though he was afraid of a hate crime. He also called himself the gay Tupac. The day after the Nigerian guys got caught, Jussie decided to do his first interview and immediately put the waterworks on. He really wanted to keep the heat off. He acted like it was the hardest thing in the world for him, but then also started smiling at certain points. Look, I get it. I'm one of those people who smiles when I'm uncomfortable because I don't know what the fuck to do. I'm that one person in the horror movie who keeps making jokes despite the fact that everyone is literally dying because I don't want to panic. So I get that, but it's just almost mechanical how he immediately cries, then he immediately turns the waterworks off because he wants to smile and act like he's being the strong, defiant guy, and then he just starts crying going again. It's like an off switch. He acted like it was the hardest thing in the world despite the fact that he was surrounded by people who advocated for him because of their political cult. For the interview, he was asked what happened, and he began the story by saying that he wanted to go to Walgreens. He then continued the story about Walgreens. He kept explaining that about 60% of his initial recount is just going to get the fucking sandwich. I think this is one of the tells of his lies. Now, I'm not one of those analysis people, I don't know what I'm doing, but this is like a layman's perspective. He is obsessed with details. He thinks the more details he has, the more legit it seems, even though I think that someone who's in this conversation, yes, might fixate on these details because of trauma, but also would try to get to that part initially a lot quicker than someone who is just calmly explaining the Walgreens adventure. That explains the noose as well. He likes to keep it on to show his legitimacy because of the details of the noose, even though it just looks like he's trying to show off. But also, it comes with this other sort of simultaneously opposite thing where he tries to leave out the details by acting overly skeptical. Questioning something makes him look more legit. What I mean by this is, when it comes to something like this, you've always heard the story of somebody who, let's say, ran into someone who was being an asshole to them at the supermarket. Then they said, it was because I'm black, isn't it? Or it's because I'm white, isn't it? Or something like that. Even though it just sounds like a stretch, like they might just be an asshole. Who says it's about racism? I think what he was trying to go for is, by specifically saying, I don't know if it was red hats, he was trying to say, I don't know if it was politically motivated or anything, I was just being attacked, and it would make him seem like he wasn't trying to stretch it for anything, and that would make him seem more legit because he was just talking about being attacked. However, in this instance, it really shows how he just wasn't paying attention, because if someone had attacked me and they had screamed something about MAGA, which I don't know why they would in Australia, but whatever, if that had happened and they were wearing red hats, then I would say, yeah, they were wearing red hats. I don't remember taking that good of a look at them, but they were yelling MAGA, so I can assume that they're red hats from the campaign. It's just something that you're allowed to say. You're allowed to make those inferences because you're telling your side of the story. You were there. It's fine. But he acts like he's being way too cautious about it, and that just makes him seem like he's acting way too hard. I hope that makes sense. It's like you're pretending that you suddenly lost your reasoning skills because it makes you look like suspicious. They also brought up the persons of interest in the blurry footage that was released, and Jussie says that he just knows it's them. He was asked about if it was the stature or their height or anything like that, but he diverts immediately and starts saying that it's normal for people to cover their faces in winter, as if he's trying to convince us it's not suspicious, which immediately makes it more suspicious.
The description of the attack.
I gave a body description, and because I saw this, right here or whatever, but I can't tell you what color their eyes were. I can't tell you, and I did not see anything except the second person I saw running away. And the first person, I saw his stature. I gave the description as best as I could. You have to understand also that it's Chicago in winter. People can wear ski masks and nobody's gonna question that.
The police have gone through a lot of video, and they were able to capture an image of two people of interest. Have you seen that image, and do you believe that they could possibly be the attackers?
I do.
What is it about their size, or why do you feel that they could possibly be?
Because I was there. For me, when that was released, I was like, okay, we're getting somewhere. I don't have any doubt in my mind that that's them.
He also mentioned the phone thing and said that he had private contacts on there, and he also says that he didn't want to call the police because of his pride. He thinks the only reason he was attacked is because he goes really hard at 45, which is the president, by the way, because not saying the name of the person that you're criticizing doesn't make you sound like a pussy, and he criticized the administration, so that means that random supporters would then attack him.
Why do you think you were targeted?
I can just assume, I come really, really hard against 45. I come really, really hard against his administration. And I don't hold my tongue.
I want to ask you about Jussie Smollett.
I think that's horrible. It doesn't get worse.
And that directly contradicts what he did before, of what I was just explaining with the skepticism. You were acting like you didn't want to make it too clear that they were wearing MAGA hats or anything, but then you say that it's directly related to the president. Are you skeptical or not? But this is all that the media needs. TMZ makes this delightful comment about the beating and the slurs not being as bad as when they said the catchphrase.
They jumped him and brutally beat the hell out of him. They also poured bleach on him during the attack and put a noose around his neck. Now here's the really scary part about this attack. We're told that as the men fled, they yelled, "This is MAGA country."
Classy. Now, obligatory, I don't care about American politics, so I'm not going to defend or insult Trump because it's not about him. I don't give a shit. But that's not the point. Jussie is a dumbass, that's the point. The thing that especially fucks with me is when he says he was on the phone with his manager at the time. He was on his phone with the manager the entire time the attack happened. He was walking down the street with the phone, and then he dropped the phone, was attacked, and the call was still ongoing at that time, and then he screamed about the noose, they screamed at him, they walked away, and then he picked up the phone again. And the first thing that he heard was the guy on the other end saying, "Yo, what happened, lol?"
They ran, and the phone was in my pocket, but it had fallen out, and it was sitting there, and my manager was still on the phone. So I picked up the phone and I said, "Brandon," and he's like, "What's going on?"
You think the guy would have had a bit of a more concerned response, what with the screaming? But apparently he didn't hear the screaming. But that doesn't matter because the witnesses didn't hear the screaming either. Despite any of the celeb media virtue signaling, everyone was eerily silent when he was found out to be lying. But not CNN. CNN immediately blamed Twitter and said that the journalist never did anything wrong, as well as deleting all of their prior coverage.
There was a rush to judgment. I think it was mostly in the celebrity press and among activists and among Twitter people. I think it was a really careful reporting by news organizations.
When asked about how he feels about people not believing him, Jussie says that he's angry because he thinks if the attacker was black or Muslim, everyone would have believed him. Jussie, the attackers were black. That's why no one believes you. And then he takes the opportunity to make a big deal about how being gay and having the big gay is a big deal, and he is the voice of the black gay youth fighting back. Imagine a black gay youth who is really going through some shit right now, who is watching this and knowing that there are gonna be people who are less likely to believe their struggle because of Jussie. And then Jussie goes on about how he is helping that black child. Imagine how that child is feeling. This cuts to an entire segment about him humble bragging and feeding his ego while implying that he had the capacity to fight against these two huge lads. These two absolute units that he paid to not hurt him too hard. He makes a big deal about how he's fighting back and blah blah blah, and then after all of that he cries a little more. He also uses the words true and truth a whole lot because he thinks that's how it sounds more legit, and he pauses so fucking much between his sentences for dramatic effect as well. He's like William Shatner, but at least Shatner is funny to listen to, even if unintentionally sometimes. Hey, remember that one OG series episode called The Enemy Within, where Kirk has to fight off his evil self, but then he realizes he has to accept his flaws and become one with it instead of trying to yeet it out of existence, because you can't really improve yourself but by destroying yourself, and that's what the evil part of you wants to do, destroy yourself. But instead of blaming yourself or others, you should just work with yourself to get better. Neither do I. What's Star Trek? The best part about this was when Chicago superintendent, a black man, had some very, very harsh words for Smollett.
I come to you not only as the superintendent of the Chicago Police Department, but also as a black man who spent his entire life living in the city of Chicago. That Empire actor, Jussie Smollett, took advantage of the pain and anger of racism to promote his career. Why would anyone, especially an African-American man, use the symbolism of a noose to make false accusations?
Now, as well, these people, these crazy media people, are the first to say offensive jokes hurt. Remember the Count Dankula thing? They were all like, yeah, let's just send him to jail, he's a Nazi, and they ignored the context of what humor is. But when someone actually lies with the intent of making light of something like lynching for their personal gain, they defend it. So joking about it to try and ease human suffering, which is what the point of humor is, which is why it's offensive to ease human suffering, is bad. But somebody genuinely trying to undermine all of the shit that has happened to people in the past by using it for their own gain, that's fine. I don't really want to go to Clown World today, but the case is still bogged down in red tape today. Because of all of the stuff that's happened in 2020, I guess it takes a lot of time to do this sort of thing. There's not much specific word about it, and I combed through a lot of articles that really just said the same thing. It's hard to not understand how complicated this would be, especially with the stuff that's happened this year, but it is moving very slowly. It's also a good note to end on that Smollett was in a BLM crowd raising a fist at Trump Tower, so he's still trying to play the same game that he was before. Don't you love the current year? But hey, at least the hate crime thing isn't a trend now.
So he's just gonna talk about him now. Because he's run out of money.
master at beating the slot machine has run out of money, but he's going to continue this informational tape.